Hey folks, imagine if something happened to your parent, child, or loved one and you had no legal authority to make medical or financial decisions for them while they were unable to make those decisions for themselves. It happens every day across America, costing the spouses or adult children of baby boomers and seniors tens of thousands of dollars in court costs, long hours of court appearances, and more stress and anxiety than you can possibly imagine. In fact, we see it frequently here at Boomer Benefits when a loved one is trying to speak with Medicare on a beneficiary's behalf, and Medicare will refuse to speak with that person unless the proper signed authorizations are on file ahead of time. In today's video, I've invited my friend Cameron Huddleston, an award-winning personal finance journalist and author, to come on and talk to us about her new book, Mom, Dad, We Need to Talk: How to Have Essential Conversations with Your Parents About Finances. Cameron herself is the adult child of a parent who developed Alzheimer's at the age of 65, and she nearly missed her window to get the right paperwork in order so that she could help to carry out her mother's wishes. In her book, she explains what paperwork you need and when you should get that paperwork done so that if something happens to you, you won't leave the decisions about you to be made by a court-appointed stranger. Though her book is written from the perspective of how you have this conversation with your parents, I asked Cameron to also discuss how current Medicare beneficiaries, the people like you in our audience here on the Boomer Benefits YouTube channel, can help make this same conversation easier for their own kids, spouses, or loved ones, and what steps they can take today to get the ball rolling. One thing is for certain: we should never assume that the people we love know what our wishes are, and that's what this book is all about. So let's dive into this conversation with Cameron Huddleston, the author of Mom, Dad, We Need to Talk. Cameron, hello. I'm so excited that you've joined us today.
Hi, thanks so much for having me here with you.
Oh, I'm just so excited. My audience is going to be in for such a treat because I'm an avid reader. I read your book. I thought it was incredible. As a Medicare expert, we run into people all the time where a spouse or a child is trying to help them with their health care or needs information from their Medicare account, and they don't have the proper authorization. And so your book was just a beautiful review of all the things that someone needs to have in place to be able to get done the things that they may need to for their parents or for their children or for their loved one. You never know where that relationship is going to come in. So thank you for writing such a great book, and I definitely plug it to all of my audience because it's a great read and has great resources in there. So I cannot imagine what a monster undertaking this was. Tell me a little bit about why you decided to write this book.
I wrote this book because I don't want people to make the same mistake I made with my mother when I was 35 and she was 65, which is relatively young. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and I had not had detailed conversations with her about her finances. I had talked with her several years before her diagnosis about getting long-term care insurance, but she couldn't because of another pre-existing health condition. She was just considered too much of a risk to insure.
Yeah.
And of course, looking back now, I can see that I should have had a conversation with her then. I should have said, Mom, let's sit down and look at your finances, figure out how you would pay for long-term care if you ever need it. But I didn't.
Yeah.
And then when she started having issues with her memory, I had to step in and start taking action. And it wasn't a conversation about what if this happens. Suddenly it was, this is happening, we need to deal with it. And that made it much more uncomfortable than it needed to be. If we had had the conversation sooner, we would have been talking about hypothetical situations. When I stepped in, it was because she was facing a problem. She needed my help. And it was uncomfortable because the conversation wasn't just about finances. It was, you're having trouble remembering things.
Yeah.
And I can see that you need my help. And I just didn't want to have to be the one pointing out to her that she was having memory troubles. So I want people to realize that they need to be having these conversations sooner rather than later. And I wanted to give them basically a guidebook for having the conversations because they can be difficult.
Yeah, I know we experience that too. Sometimes when we've helped someone with setting up a Medicare authorization notice, if the person isn't in their right mind anymore, they don't understand some of the questions that you're asking, and it gets so much more difficult. So What are some of the signs that your mom was showing when you began to notice the memory loss? Your description of this is so poignant in the book, and as a reader, your heart just goes out to you because anytime you have to watch a loved one and the signs of that personality are slipping away, and you realize that a memory loss is happening. So, how can other people identify some of those signs in their spouse or their parent or their child?
I think the signs are easy to miss at first, especially because we're telling ourselves maybe it's something else. With my mom, I thought maybe it was a hearing loss. The pre-existing health condition that she had that prevented her from getting long-term care insurance, it was a benign tumor behind her left ear, and it had caused hearing loss. And so
Okay.
initially, when she would ask me questions
Mhm.
and then ask them again, I thought maybe it was because she wasn't hearing my response.
Yeah.
And she started doing this pretty frequently, but it became very obvious when I was visiting with her one night that the hearing loss was not the problem. We were sitting in her den having a conversation, and she said to me, "Do you want to go outside to my porch and see this new bench I bought?"
Hmm.
So we went outside. She showed me the bench. We went back inside and we started talking again. But within a few minutes, she
Yeah.
asked me, "Do you want to see the new bench I
Oh,
bought?" And
yeah.
I know my heart broke. I mean, there was no denying at that point that it wasn't a matter of her not hearing things. She forgot something we had done just a couple minutes sooner.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, obviously, as we get older, we tend to forget things more often. We might forget someone's name, or, you
Sure.
ask someone a question and maybe you forget what they say, or maybe it's oftentimes because you're not necessarily paying attention to their response.
Hmm.
But it was so clear then that it was something we had done. We had gotten up, walked outside, looked at the
Yeah.
bench, that there was a problem. And there were other things too. I could see in her cabinets, she had like several of the same thing. In her refrigerator,
Ah.
several of the same thing. Items that she had bought that were well past the expiration date because she didn't know what the date was.
Hmm.
Seeing her become less organized. Like her house was always very clean, and paper, like the mail, she would go through the mail to put things away. But as her memory was getting worse, the mail was piling up. She had Post-it notes around her house reminding her to do things. All sorts of notes she had scrawled on her calendar reminding her to do things. And so you could see her becoming disorganized. You could see that she wasn't taking care of her house as well. These were a lot of the initial signs that she was having trouble remembering things. And so,
Yeah.
one of the first things I did was offering to help her go through her mail so that I could sort through the junk mail and the bills that were important that needed to get paid.
Of course, yeah, and these are the little things that you don't really think about when someone has memory loss. It's not just in the conversation, but they're struggling to maintain things in their own lives, or sometimes they're putting Post-it notes everywhere to try to remind themselves things because they know on some level that their memory is slipping, and it's important to be on the lookout for that. So, why do you think it's so important to have the conversation about money specifically with your parents sooner rather than later?
Because really your own finances could be impacted. And
Yeah.
certainly and also because it's not just the money, it's the legal part of it that of course affects finances too. And this was so important with my mom. When I noticed she was having trouble remembering things, I suggested that we go in and meet with an attorney. This is one of the first steps I took to starting to get involved with my mom's finances. I said, "Mom, we've got to make sure that your will, your power of attorney, and your living will, which is also called an advanced healthcare directive, we've got to make sure those things are updated." This is so important. I can't even stress how important it is to have the power of attorney and the living will
Yes.
updated in place, because you have to be mentally competent to sign those documents. And if I had waited any longer with my mother, the attorney might have found her not competent enough to sign those documents. And then you get into a situation where if there is a health crisis, if there is dementia and you have to step in and start making financial and healthcare decisions for a parent, if those documents aren't in place, then you have to go through the court process to be
Yes.
legally appointed to make those decisions. So that is so important. But also, if you have the conversation sooner rather than later, you can create a plan for long-term care, a plan for, helping your parents age comfortably in their own home, a plan for
Mm-hmm.
your parents to, get through retirement, perhaps if they don't have enough savings. Planning ahead gives you so many more options. If you're waiting till you're in a crisis situation, your parents have already retired, they've discovered they don't have enough money for their health care, their retirement, their long-term care, your options are fewer and you might not even have any options. And so really it's just about being proactive rather than reactive.
So in the book, you tell this other story about your friend Doug, who didn't make it on time to help his dad with the paperwork. Can you share that with the audience? Because I know that when I read this, even though I'm used to this with Medicare and I've covered all of this conversation with my mom, and we went a few years ago and we did all this paperwork, after I read that story in your book, the first thing I did was call her and ask her to send me screenshots of all of the forms that we had done to make sure that I didn't miss the living will or the durable power of attorney. For Medicare folks, a lot of our audience here today, you need the durable power of attorney for healthcare. So tell us about, exactly what you might go through if you don't have this paperwork in place before the person is, no longer competent to sign that.
Honestly, it's a nightmare if you don't have these legal documents in place. So yes, a friend of mine, his name is Doug, and Doug is a super financially savvy guy. He blogs about money. He's written a book about money for members of the military. So this guy is certainly on top of things, but he had not talked to his dad about his finances before his dad developed Alzheimer's disease. He had not been named his father's power of attorney. And then Doug gets a call in the middle of the night from an ER doctor, and the doctor is having to do surgery on his father. He had a bleeding ulcer. Doug has to hop on a plane from Hawaii, where he lives, to go be with his dad in Colorado. And Doug quickly realizes that he can't get access to his dad's bank account to pay the bills for his dad, the hospital bills, and then his dad goes into nursing care for rehabilitation. Actually ends up staying there because he has dementia at this point, and then moves into assisted living. Doug went to his father's bank and said, hey, I need to, sign checks for my dad. I need to access his accounts. And the bank, of course, they say, well, are you your father's power of attorney? Because
Yeah,
the bank has to protect their client. They
of
can't
course.
just let someone come in and say, hey, I need to sign checks for your client's account. They can't do that. And Doug did not have power of attorney for his father. He was not named his dad's power of attorney, and the bank said, I'm sorry, we can't do anything for you. You're going to have to go to court to become your dad's conservator. So that's what Doug did. Doug spent 9 months and
Mm,
$10,000 hiring attorneys, a neuropsychiatrist to evaluate his dad, and basically putting his father on trial to prove that he was no longer mentally competent to make financial decisions on his own. And Doug was also spending money, his own money, to pay his dad's bills until he got access to his dad's bank account and could reimburse himself. I mean, this is an expense that most people can't shoulder. How many people can, give up 9 months of their time, $10,000, $20,000 to go through the legal process of becoming your parent's conservator? Or, even, I don't think a lot of people even realize this. If you haven't named a spouse as your power of attorney, your spouse can have limited ability to make financial and healthcare decisions for you. So if you are, a baby boomer and you're thinking, well, I don't have to worry about this, my spouse can make these decisions,
mm-hmm.
that's not necessarily the case. You need to have, a power of attorney, a backup power of attorney to make these decisions for you. And I want people to realize that by naming someone to be your power of attorney, your healthcare power of attorney, you're not giving up control. You are actually maintaining control because you're
Yeah.
naming the person you want to make these decisions for you. You are naming someone you trust rather than allowing someone to step up and go to court to get this control. So you want to be the one who picks the person who's going to make these important decisions for you.
Yeah, that's really a great point, because if you didn't have that in place, the part that I didn't understand is it's not even just the 9 months or the 12 months and all the money that you would spend getting that, but that once a court awards that conservatorship, there's a responsibility that you have to the court as you go, where you have to report in and you have to keep a list of all the expenses. So just imagine if you were no longer able to make these decisions yourself and you put your spouse or your child in the position of, in the middle of all their own lives, their own family, everything they've got to do, they have to be keeping this record of every penny that they send out of your account and then submitting that to the court so the court can keep an eye on it. And that would be the luckier part of getting the conservatorship. You might not be able to get that. And then they're awarding a guardian that may not know your family at all, which would be just terrifying. So although it's not fun to think about these things, and you may think, I won't be of right mind, I won't care, it won't be my problem, but it will become a problem for someone that you love.
Exactly. And you're so right, because Doug had to do that with his father every year. He had to file a report with the court as his father's conservator, detailing how he spent his dad's money to pay for his care. As power of attorney for my mother, I don't have to do that. I simply take that document. I go to her financial institutions only once to show them I'm my mom's power of attorney. They keep it in their files. They know, and when I get on the phone with them, hey, you're talking to me, my mom's daughter, because I'm her power of attorney. Sometimes financial institutions will have their own documents you have to fill out in addition to showing that power of attorney, but I don't have to file a report with anyone every year. I just simply manage my mom's finances for her because of this power that she granted me while she was still competent enough to do it. And yes, it did cost money, but that amount that she paid to have those documents drafted by an attorney, that's a fraction of what I would have had to pay if I went through the court system to become her conservator.
Exactly. And there are elder law attorneys in every city that you can visit that can handle this for you. There's even online options, which certainly aren't as good as sitting down with someone and going through everything. But if cost is an issue, get the basics in place so that if this ever happens, you don't find yourself scrambling, because it's enough work to take care of all the things. You're helping maintain that person's home, and even if they move into a facility later, there's all of their possessions that you've got to deal with, and your plate is going to be already so full. So having this other piece in place takes away one stressor so that you can concentrate on everything else. And I thought that was a very clear picture in the book. And the other thing too is, I had been asking when I saw you recently how your mom is now. This has been a number of years that you've been doing this for her. So when someone does have memory loss, Alzheimer's, dementia, it's not an immediately fatal condition. So people can live with this for years and years that you might be trying to fight this battle.
Exactly. I couldn't imagine if I had to file a report annually with the court system, because it's been more than 10 years since my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Now, I do file a report every year with the Social Security Administration because I am her representative payee, but it's simple. I mean, it is a pretty simple report to fill out. But if I had to go through the process that my friend Doug did with his father in the court system, I mean, it would be, gosh, it would be incredibly taxing. I can't even imagine the headache it would create.
Of course. And I know we've got to have listeners out there who probably are going through this right now. So one of the things that I thought about when I read your book for my audience is, you talk about how to have a tough conversation with your parents. So a lot of people in the audience here are the parents. And so I wanted to ask you, speaking of the documents and all those things that need to be handled, when is a good time for parents to execute a power of attorney and a living will with their children? And when having that financial conversation, what are some of the things that you should look at? What are some of the most important pieces of that conversation in terms of being a parent that's responsible and helping your child get these documents in place?
Well, as far as those legal documents, do it today. I mean, get on the phone, find an elder law, estate planning attorney, look for recommendations from your friends. There are associations for elder law and estate law attorneys. You can go online to those associations, search their databases, make an appointment today. You don't want to forget to do this. Or if that doesn't fit within your budget, yes, there are websites such as nolo.com, legalzoom.com that have these documents for a pretty affordable cost. They're going to be a little bit more generic than what you'd get with an attorney, but certainly something is better than nothing. Don't wait, because you never know what could happen. I mean, you could
Yeah.
be in your 50s and perfectly healthy, but you could get in a car accident tomorrow. And at
Yeah.
that point, it's going to be too late. I did all my legal documents. I did it years ago. I'm 46 now. I mean, I've actually gone through the process twice. And so, I've had mine for years. My husband has had his for years. So don't wait to do these documents. If you are going to have these conversations with your kids, which you should, I wrote a book geared toward adult children, encouraging them to talk to their parents, but don't expect your kids to come to you because they might not even realize they need to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Talk to your kids. Let them know that you want to plan for those worst case scenarios. You don't want to scare them, of course, because it can be very difficult for children to imagine a time when their parents might need help from them. Imagine a time when their parents aren't going to be there. So they might be reluctant to have the conversation too, but you just simply let your kids know, look, if something were to happen, if an emergency were to arise, I know it would be difficult for you. Having these conversations now are going to make it easier. I want to fill you in on some details of my finances. I want to let you know where my legal documents are and how to access them and under what situations I think it's okay for you to access these documents. The power of attorney document, the living will that spells out what sort of end of life care I would or would not want. And you don't have to necessarily tell your kids all the details of your finances.
Yes.
Write it down. Make a list, and the more information you provide them, the better. But make a list of all your accounts, those usernames and passwords if you have online accounts, the type of insurance policies you have, your sources of income, that Medicare number, your Social Security number, because your kids will need all of that information if they ever have to step in and help you out with your finances, as I have with my mom. And I had to play detective. I had to go
Yeah.
through, her tax documents and dig up this information on my own as she was forgetting things and I was having to get more involved with her finances. And I didn't like having to be in that role of snooping around to get that information, but it was essential because my mom was divorced. Actually, my father had already passed away at that point. I mean, it was all on me to take care of her. And so I had to help her out. And of course, she's my mom. I wanted to help her. So the more information you give your kids, the better equipped they're going to be able to help you. And of course, you should be doing the same thing with your spouse. I mean, if you're
Of
if you're
course.
married or if you have a partner, that partner needs to know how to access your accounts if something were to happen to you. And a lot of couples don't even do this.
Mhm.
Do you do you know what the password is for your partner's bank account? If they go online, because plenty of
Yeah.
people don't even have joint accounts. So the more information you give your kids, the better. But like I said, you don't have to tell them. Write it down, put it someplace safe, and tell your kids how to access it. And they have to be able to access it because it's not going to do them any good if it's locked away and they don't have the key to get it.
Yeah, and you have to think about it from your child's perspective too. They don't want to be nosy. They don't want to they don't want to have a conversation with you that feels like they're trying to find out how much money you have. It's more of a conversation about, who's going to be the person in charge of making these decisions for you. And something also to think about is you might always in your mind be thinking that a certain child is going to be the one that takes care of you, but does that child know that they're the one that you're expecting to do this? Because there's probably going to be a period of time, or in some situations, where you're still living in your own home and they're providing care to help you remain in that home for as long as possible. And so they need to know who your plumber is, who the local vendors are. If you have pets, who's your veterinarian? Those are things that can also be easily added to the big financial stuff. You could put it in a certain file cabinet and give your child the key to that, or you can create a document. I know I have a document saved with my username and password so that if something happens to me, my husband is able to get into all of those. And I think as a parent, and of course a spouse, you can make this so much easier on your loved one by you initiating that conversation I know with my own mom, she's absolutely certain that I'll be the one taking care of her. It definitely won't be my brother. He would want to try to throw money at the problem, which isn't always a solution. So don't assume that your kids know that, especially, there's two of us, but you could have, I have clients with kids of 6 or 8 adult children, and they need to know, who's the person that you're designating in the event of this, your inability to make these decisions, to make those on your behalf.
I think too, it's not just talking about what you have in place, what accounts you have, what sort of insurance policies you have, but it's really important to talk to your kids about long-term care.
Yeah.
Because if you are expecting them to help provide that care if you ever need it, they need to know this, because that will certainly affect their finances. They might be planning to downsize into a smaller home when their kids go off to college, but that might not be a good idea for them if you are counting on them to help you, because you might need to go live with those kids. And if they've
Yeah.
downsized to a smaller house and they don't have room for you, then suddenly they're forced to perhaps move to a larger home that can accommodate you. They might have to take time off work. They might not have saved enough for retirement, and they're expecting to work, well into their late 60s. But if they can't do that because you need to help care for them, these are things that they need to know so they can be prepared financially. And I certainly think if you have the resources to pay for long-term care, I would encourage you to start looking into facilities,
Hmm.
assisted living facilities, memory care facilities, nursing homes, to see what's available, to let your kids know, hey, I've checked into these places and these are the ones that I like.
Yeah.
These are the ones that I would be okay living in if something were to happen to me. Because long-term care, if you have to care for someone, it's a full-time job.
Yeah.
And if your children have children, you certainly don't want to have to force them into a situation where they can't provide for their kids because they're needing to step in and help out with you. And certainly long-term care includes all aspects of care. It includes not just helping someone eat and prepare meals, but it also involves, it gets down to everything: going to the
Yep.
bathroom, taking showers. And
Bathing.
you have to ask yourself, do I really want my kids or a
Yeah.
professional who's trained in this to be helping me with those things? And so, yes, if you have the resources, you should be creating a plan to have perhaps professional care, someone in your house or in a facility, so that that burden isn't placed on your kids.
Yeah, and it's important to realize too, Medicare doesn't offer this coverage. So a lot of people think that Medicare covers it, or they confuse Medicare and Medicaid. So what Medicare provides for is it will cover your medical needs while you live in assisted living or a nursing home, but it doesn't cover the cost of the facility itself. And assisted living, I think I read recently, can be anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 a month, whereas if you get into memory care or a nursing home, you're closer to $8,000 a month. That's a huge chunk of money. And so the sooner that you plan for that, the better. You can purchase long-term care insurance. I think I've heard people say the sweet spot for that is in your early 50s,
Mhm.
when you're hopefully still able to qualify for the coverage itself and that the premiums are manageable. Because once you get older, those premiums, of course, will be a lot higher, and it may not be something you can afford. Or in some situations, like in the case of your mom, you go to apply and you get turned down. Well, you want that to happen early enough that you have opportunity to make other arrangements. Go out and check out those facilities, estimate the costs, look at your finances, try to put some money aside for that. If you are able to do long-term care insurance, it's important to add an inflation rider, because what you buy today is going to be completely different 20 years from now. And I remember this in setting up my own parents' long-term care. I don't sell that type of coverage. I went to a professional who specializes in that. She really educated us on the fact that sometimes people think of long-term care insurance and they totally associate that with a nursing home, and they just say, I'm never going to go there. I don't want to deal with that. But having that policy, a lot of them now have great features where it can also provide for a helper in your own home. So you do have that professional to assist you a certain number of hours a week in all of the activities of daily living, so that your own children don't have to be part of that. where you have a professional helping you instead of creating a situation for you and your family that is uncomfortable or embarrassing or not something that you had planned for. So those are things that are important. And then the last step that we often see people have to do is if they don't have the money set aside or they didn't have a long-term care insurance policy, you can go through a spend down and get on Medicaid. But when you do that, you aren't necessarily going to end up in the facility that you want. You'll have a room that you might share with another person. And so that really needs to be your last resort, and proper planning for all of this now that you may be watching and knowing that Medicare doesn't cover that is all about you doing that preparation.
And certainly if you can afford to meet with a financial planner,
Mm-hmm.
especially someone who specializes in developing plans for older adults and is very familiar with the options for paying for long-term care,
Mm-hmm.
they can walk you through the various options. Yes, long-term care insurance is an option. You can also get life insurance that has a long-term care benefit. There are annuities out there that are specifically for long-term care. So someone who is really well-versed in this area of financial planning can help you review the options that would be available to you and find the best one for you, for your own financial situation, for your own position in life, whether you're already in your 60s or whether you're in your 50s. I mean, your options are going to be different. Like you said, long-term care insurance might not be available for you if you're already in your 60s, your 70s, and you have health issues already. So working with someone who is a professional certainly is a good idea if that's something you can afford. And there are actually financial planners out there who charge only by the hour. Mm-hmm. And so it might not be nearly as expensive as you think it might be to meet with someone who is a professional.
Yes, that's right. And again, they're easy to find online. You could also check with your other insurance brokers. I know that we refer people to elder law attorneys here all the time because we don't do that. So ask around. Maybe some of your friends have worked with an elder law attorney in your area and they could recommend a good person. And this might be something that you go in on and have an appointment, you sit down, and in 2 or 3 hours, you can take care of all of this. You can have the conversation about planning. You can share your wishes. You can get the documents done. You can make sure that your kids have a copy. Then the elder law attorney has a copy, and you're going to walk out of there. You may have spent a few $100s for their time, but just the peace of mind that you would have in leaving there would just be so important. So much other great information here in your book, Cameron. Do you have any final thoughts you want to leave people with? And then let everybody know where we can pick up Mom and Dad We Need to Talk.
I just want people to realize how important these conversations are, that they can't wait. It might seem awkward to have these conversations. If you're the adult child, it might seem awkward to have the conversation with your parents because your parents might consider to be money a taboo topic. But I tell you, it's going to be a lot more awkward if the parent ends up in the hospital. You can't access the bank accounts to pay the bills, and then you have to go through the court process. As the parent, you might feel like your kids don't need to know this information, but there is very likely a chance that your kids will have to get involved with your financial life as you age. So it's better to be prepared, and if you don't trust your own children, maybe it's a niece or a nephew or a cousin or another family member. You need to have someone out there who's got your back.
Yeah.
And trust with this information. And so just don't wait to have these conversations. They're so important. And I've got, I do have some resources on my website. It's CameronHuddleston.com. And there is this downloadable fill in the blank in case of an organizer. It's free, and it's got, places to list all that information, including, who your pet's veterinarian is, who should take care of the pet when you're no longer here, and your final wishes. And, I tried to cover all the bases in there for people. So it's free. You can download it. I've got a scam red flag sheet, which is great, hanging up on your refrigerator by the phone, so that when you get those calls, you're going to recognize right away that it's a scam. And so, CameronHuddleston.com, lots of information on there.
Terrific. Well, we'll drop the link to that, folks, in the notes below the video so that you can go and grab that freebie. And then I would encourage you, of course, to pick up the book. It's a really easy read. You'll be surprised at the information that you find in there that you really never thought of. Me being a Medicare expert, I would think that I had covered it all. But truly and honestly, when I finished it, I felt, I had to call my own parent and have a conversation again to make sure, did we really do all of the things that I heard in here? Because it just seems like such a nightmare that you might go through without it. So, Cameron, I know you're a very busy personal
professional finance journalist and you have lots of things to do in your schedule. So I really appreciate you coming on to educate our viewers here at Boomer Benefits about the things that they may be able to do. And I hope that people walk away, of course, to go and have some conversations with their kids. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to help.
Thank you.